It happened at 8:06 a.m. London time. Just as the city was shaking off the last threads of a pale winter dawn, a single notification lit up the phones of millions, carrying a message no one expected and everyone feared. A statement from Catherine, Princess of Wales. The words were simple, carefully measured, and yet heavy enough to still the air across the United Kingdom. Following a series of specialist consultations, William and I have learned that our son, Prince Louis, has been diagnosed with a condition that requires ongoing care. We are committed to supporting him with love, stability, and the privacy he deserves. No details, no medical terminology, no reassurance wrapped in the hopeful language the palace typically relied on. Just the truth. Bare, quiet, heartbreaking truth. Within minutes, the news raced across morning broadcasts. BBC cut through its usual program with a heavy tone. Sky News anchors fell silent between sentences, searching for composure. Even American networks, barely past midnight on the East Coast, broke into scheduled segments with urgent updates. Outside Kensington Palace, people gathered instinctively as though the cold courtyard itself had called them. Some stood motionless, phones still raised, others covered their mouths. Older viewers, those who had lived through the tender, complicated eras of Charles, Diana, and the early years of William and Harry, whispered the same sentence again and again. "Oh God, not the children." Across Britain, something unspoken settled into the winter air. An ache that no royal protocol could soften, no press strategy could dilute. Prince Louis, 5 years old, the family's mischievous spark, the child whose joyful expressions had charmed the world, was now facing a challenge his parents had fought desperately to keep private. And at the center of it all stood Catherine. Inside Kensington Palace, the atmosphere that morning was unlike anything staff had witnessed in years. The corridors, normally filled with the steady rhythm of daily duties, felt unnervingly still. Even the long-serving attendants who had seen births, transitions, illness, and scandal moved with a gentleness that betrayed their worry. The announcement had not been made lightly. For weeks, perhaps months, the decision had hung over Catherine like a winter cloud, refusing to break. She had drafted versions, revised them, torn them apart, rewritten them, then folded them away again. Each time she wrestled with the same impossible balance: protect Louis' privacy, honor the public's trust, preserve the dignity of a child living far beyond the spotlight's reach. But now, with whispers growing and inquiries tightening around unexplainable cancellations in the Wales family calendar, Catherine knew silence would no longer shield her son. William had offered to deliver the statement himself. She refused. "This is my responsibility," she had said the night before, her voice steady but thin at the edges. "I will not let this story reach the public without hearing it from me." Those who stood beside her during that tense evening saw a woman not merely performing royal duty, but carrying the weight of motherhood in its rawest form. She had faced the country before during joyful milestones, national tragedies, demanding initiatives, but never like this. Never with her child's vulnerability pressed against her heart. The hours leading to the announcement were agonizing. Shortly after dawn, Catherine retreated to the small sitting room adjacent to her private study, a space she often used for reading, quiet reflection, or drafting letters. Today it felt like a sanctuary and a battlefield in equal measure. Her statement lay printed on the table beside her. She read it once more, silently mouthing each word, as though making sure they still aligned with the truth she felt compelled to share. A faint knock at the door. William entered quietly. He did not speak at first. Instead, he walked to her, sat beside her, and took her hands in his. "They will understand," he said softly. "And they will stand with us." But Catherine shook her head gently. "I don't fear for us," she whispered. "I fear for him." It was the only moment her composure faltered. At 7:59 a.m., the Palace Communications Office received the final approval. The statement would go live at 8:06 precisely, a time chosen not for symbolism, but to avoid competing with parliamentary coverage and international scheduling cycles. At 8:05, Catherine stood by the window overlooking the frost-covered gardens. She breathed deeply, her reflection faint in the glass. A mother first, a future queen second, a shield for her children always. At 8:06 the announcement was released, and by 8:07 the world felt different. For in that single minute, the veil between monarchy and humanity dissolved in a way that echoed the most vulnerable moments of Diana's era. A reminder that behind titles, behind ceremony, behind centuries of tradition, lived a family bound not by myth, but by love and now by fear. The winter had shifted and nothing inside the Wales household would ever be the same again. Behind closed doors the first signs something was wrong. The earliest signs were so subtle, so easily disguised beneath the natural rhythms of childhood that even those closest to the family dismissed them at first. It was late September, a period typically marked by the steady return to school routines, official engagements, and the quiet settling of the Wales household into its familiar tempo before the winter months pressed in. But something in Lewis shifted. It began with small, fleeting moments when he seemed unusually tired after play. Moments Catherine initially attributed to growth spurts and busy school days. A gentle slump on the sofa after an afternoon outdoors. A quiet withdrawal during what was normally his most energetic hour. These moments passed quickly, too quickly to raise alarm on their own. Yet Catherine noticed them. She always noticed the little things. One evening, during a private family dinner, Louis rested his head against William's arm and stayed there longer than usual. William smiled at first, brushing a hand through his son's hair. But then he exchanged a brief look with Catherine, a look that carried a ripple of worry neither said aloud. "He is just tired," William offered quietly later that night. But Catherine could not shake the unease. In early October, the first medical consultation was arranged quietly and without the palace's usual logistics. The team wanted to avoid attention, questions, or speculation. The pediatric specialist they met in London was reassuring, thorough, but non-committal. He requested more observations, additional tests, and for Catherine to monitor specific patterns over the coming weeks. Catherine left the appointment with a faint chill beneath her ribs. Not fear exactly, not yet, but something that felt like the beginning of fear. Inside Kensington Palace, staff began to sense the change even before they understood it. The atmosphere around the children's wing tightened. Senior aides were instructed to reduce Lewis's public-facing moments. Scheduled appearances involving all three Wales children were quietly adjusted or postponed. There were no press briefings, no explanations, just a subtle recalibration of visibility. Those who worked closest to Catherine could see the strain emerging behind her practiced calm. She remained warm, gracious, engaged. But there was a new layer beneath her composure, a watchfulness that made her pause during briefings, lift her head when a child coughed down the hall, or step away from meetings without explanation when her phone buzzed. Even Princess Charlotte grew slightly protective, insisting on holding Louis' hand during walks through the garden, as though sensing the adult's unspoken worry. The turning point came in mid-October during what should have been a simple school morning. Louis hesitated at the foot of the stairs, not with reluctance or mischief, but with uncertainty, a small pause, a quiet swallow, a faint tremor in his hand. Catherine knelt beside him, her voice soft. "Are you all right, darling?" Louis nodded, but his eyes didn't. That moment, tiny, almost invisible, was the one that pierced through all her rational explanations. She kissed his forehead, sent him to school, and then retreated to her study, closing the door behind her. Her private secretary entered minutes later to find her sitting at the edge of the sofa, hands clasped tightly, the morning light turning the room pale. "Please call the specialist," she said. "I want the next tests moved up." From that point forward, the palace's protective shell tightened. Meetings between William and senior advisors were shifted behind completely closed doors. Catherine's early childhood engagements were rescheduled with unprecedented frequency. Staff who had served the family for years began to speak in hushed tones, careful not to speculate, but unable to ignore the gathering concern. A particularly tense moment unfolded one late afternoon at Windsor during a small family gathering attended by Anne. The children were playing in the garden when Louis briefly sat down on the cold stone steps, rubbing his arm with a fleeting expression of discomfort. And, ever perceptive, noticed immediately. Catherine met her gaze across the terrace, and for the first time, Catherine did not find a way to soften the truth. Her expression told Anne everything she needed to know. Later, in a quiet corner away from the children, Anne placed a hand on Catherine's shoulder. A rare gesture from a woman known more for steel than softness. "You are doing everything right," Anne said. "Whatever this is, you are meeting it head on." But Catherine's voice trembled slightly when she replied, "I just want him to be all right." By early November, the palace had adopted full confidentiality protocols. Internal documents referring to the Wales children were encrypted. Scheduling changes were concealed within broader restructuring memos. Even within the family, conversations grew more cautious. Charles was informed in careful increments. Camilla was briefed separately, and only a handful of top-level aides knew the extent of the ongoing consultations. But beneath all the protocol, beneath all the protective silence, the truth was becoming unmistakable. Something was wrong. Something real. Something no title, no lineage, no centuries of monarchy could shield them from. And as winter approached, Catherine felt the quiet dread grow heavier. A dread she tried desperately to hold alone until the diagnosis finally came and shattered the final illusion of safety. When the diagnosis arrived the night, everything changed. The diagnosis did not arrive with drama or fanfare. It came quietly, almost too quietly for the magnitude of the truth it carried, delivered in a single envelope left on the polished table in Catherine's private sitting room at Windsor. The date was November 22nd, a cold evening, when the winter wind pressed heavily against the old stone walls, and the corridors hummed with the early preparations for the holiday season. But none of that mattered. When Catherine stepped into the room and saw the envelope waiting for her, she knew instantly what it contained. For 2 days she had been living in suspended breath, waiting for the final test results, knowing that the specialists had detected patterns that could not be ignored. She had been preparing herself for the call, for the conversation, for the moment when speculation would turn into certainty. Yet, despite her preparations, her fingers trembled slightly as she opened the envelope. The room was silent. The world for a moment went still. The diagnosis was written in careful language, precise and compassionate, but the meaning was unmistakable. Louis had a chronic condition, manageable but lifelong, not fatal but significant. Not a temporary childhood phase, but a reality that would shape his development, require ongoing medical attention.